It started on a bright morning in a quiet, manicured neighborhood, the kind of place where lawns were cut to exact lengths, and residents took pride in their flower beds more than their friendships. Every house looked the same, except for the one that just changed everything. It belonged to a man named Noah. Noah wasn't the kind of homeowner the HOA expected. He wasn't loud or rude. He simply didn't belong to the cookie-cutter mold they worshipped. When he moved in, his house was neat, his paperwork was in order, and everything seemed normal, until a massive metal crate arrived on a flatbed truck one afternoon. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains as workers carefully unloaded it onto Noah's backyard. Within hours, rumors spread. Some said it was a pool installation. Others thought it was a shed. But when the crate doors opened and a thick, snorting sound came from within, the truth began to shake the foundations of Maple Grove Estates. Inside that crate was a full-grown rhino, a living, breathing rhinoceros, heavy-footed and calm, blinking under the suburban sun. Its skin was rough and gray, like living armor. It looked impossibly out of place against the backdrop of pastel homes and picket fences. Noah had adopted it from a wildlife reserve as part of a conservation program. He had land rights, permits, and fencing approved by the city's animal control. Everything was legal. But legality wasn't enough for the HOA or for Karen. Karen was the self-appointed guardian of Maple Grove's standards. She was the HOA president, unofficial mayor, and neighborhood tyrant rolled into one. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her mouth missed no opportunity to comment. From the moment she heard about the rhino, she made it her mission to get rid of it. At first, it was whispers. She called emergency HOA meetings. She handed out flyers about safety concerns. She claimed Noah's pet was a danger to children, a threat to property values, and a biological hazard. Neighbors nodded nervously but avoided getting involved. The rhino, meanwhile, lived quietly behind reinforced fences, grazing peacefully in its enclosure. But Karen wasn't satisfied with quiet. She needed a scene. Within days, she began making daily visits to Noah's fence, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, muttering insults to whoever walked by. "Who keeps a wild beast in a neighborhood like this?" She'd sneer, loud enough for Noah to hear through the windows. She called it ugly, smelly, ridiculous. She said it was a wannabe zoo. Noah stayed calm. He ignored the stares, kept his property in perfect condition, and went about his routine. But the more he ignored her, the more Karen's frustration festered. She needed the neighborhood to see him as the villain, and herself as the hero keeping them safe. So she started documenting. Photos, videos, complaints to the HOA board. She even called animal control, who confirmed again that Noah's ownership was lawful and ethical. That only enraged her more. The rhino wasn't just an animal anymore. It was a personal insult to her authority. One afternoon, she drove by with her phone recording, narrating her outrage for her own little Facebook audience. The rhino was resting quietly near the fence, its massive head lowered in the shade. Karen mocked it from her car, her voice dripping with scorn. She laughed at its size, its stillness, its existence. She called it names, ridiculed its stupidity, and declared that real homeowners wouldn't tolerate something so disgusting living next door. Her car idled as she kept filming, window down, voice raised. The rhino's ears twitched. It lifted its head, blinking slowly. She kept going, waving her hand in exaggerated disgust, revving her engine to punctuate her words. Then it happened. The rhino rose, one heavy step at a time, its nostrils flaring. A deep, low rumble came from its chest, more felt than heard. Karen, oblivious, kept mocking, thinking it was all safe from behind the fence. But the gate hadn't latched fully that morning. The workers from the city had inspected the fence earlier, and when they left, the lock hadn't clicked shut. The rhino nudged the gate, curious. It swung open. Karen's mocking tone turned into a shriek of surprise as the enormous creature stepped out. Not running, not angry. Just moving, calmly, powerfully, directly toward the noise. The car's engine sputtered as she fumbled for reverse. Her phone slipped, recording only the blur of motion as the rhino took another step forward. Neighbors froze on their porches, unable to look away. The air was thick with disbelief. The rhino lowered its head slightly, not to attack, but in the way animals do when they feel provoked, uncertain, or challenged. Karen panicked. She slammed the gas, tires squealing, but the car jolted sideways against the curb. The Rhino snorted, startled by the screech, and in an instant, instinct took over. It charged. The sound was thunderous. Dust rose from the street as its feet pounded the pavement. Karen screamed, throwing the car into drive, but before she could move, the Rhino hit the front bumper. Metal crumpled. The vehicle rocked violently. The horn blared uselessly. Then just as quickly, the Rhino stopped. It stood there, snorting, breath fogging in the air, staring at the mangled bumper. It didn't destroy the car, it just made its point. Noah came running from the backyard, shouting for calm. Animal control was called immediately, though the Rhino simply walked back toward its gate, unbothered, as if nothing had happened. Karen sat frozen behind the wheel, face pale, hands trembling. The Facebook Live video had captured everything: the mocking, the revving, the charge. Within minutes, it was spreading like wildfire across the neighborhood. By evening, everyone had seen it. Karen, the untouchable HOA president, had been publicly humiliated by her own arrogance. But she wasn't done. Embarrassment burned hotter than anger, and she was ready to fight back. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers that night. Some said Noah should sue. Others said Karen would rally the HOA for revenge. But no one knew what was coming next. Because for Karen, humiliation wasn't the end. It was the beginning of war. The video spread through Maple Grove Estates faster than wildfire and dry grass. By morning, nearly every resident had seen Karen's Rhino encounter. What was meant to be a triumphant exposé turned into a neighborhood joke. The footage showed her mocking tone, her revving engine, and the exact moment her bravado turned into terror. Even worse, it captured how the Rhino's charge stopped short, leaving her unharmed, but her car badly dented. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew she deserved it. For the first time in years, Karen's name was whispered with ridicule instead of respect. The HOA queen had been dethroned by a Rhino. Memes began circulating in group chats, photos of her car with captions like "Rhino Justice" and "Nature's HOA Response." By noon, her Facebook page was flooded with sarcastic comments. She deleted her video, but the internet had already claimed it. Karen's pride was shattered. She didn't leave her house for 2 days. Blinds drawn, phone silenced. When she finally emerged, she did so with a new purpose. The embarrassment would be erased, replaced by vengeance. The HOA was her weapon, and she wielded it like a blade. She called an emergency board meeting. Sitting at the head of the long oak table, she spoke with her usual confidence, though the faint tremor in her hands betrayed her anger. She presented Noah's Rhino as a public menace, citing emotional trauma, vehicular damage, and neighborhood instability. She proposed immediate sanctions, fines, citations, even forced removal. Most board members hesitated. They'd seen the video too. The Rhino hadn't attacked out of malice, it had been provoked. Some quietly sympathized with Noah, who had kept to himself and followed every rule. But Karen was relentless. She raised her voice, questioned their loyalty, and hinted at their own HOA violations. One by one, they yielded to her pressure. By the end of the meeting, a unanimous vote had passed. Noah would receive a series of compliance violations designed to push him out. Karen's campaign had begun. That week, Noah received his first letter, a thick envelope stuffed with HOA citations. The language was formal, but the intent was clear. Unauthorized animal containment structures, aesthetic violations, noise complaints, property boundary concerns. Each line was an attack, each fine larger than the last. But Noah didn't react the way she hoped. He didn't storm into the office, didn't shout or plead. Instead, he quietly gathered every document, the permits, the wildlife approvals, the city inspections, and placed them neatly in a binder. He was calm, methodical, patient. That infuriated her more than any insult could have. Karen wanted chaos. She wanted him to crack, to give her an excuse to escalate. But his silence left her powerless. So she doubled down. Late at night, her headlights would sweep across his property as she patrolled the neighborhood. She took photos through his fence, sent anonymous tips to animal control, and spread rumors that the Rhino had become aggressive. Parents were warned to keep their children inside. She told everyone Noah's wild pet could escape at any time, that it was dangerous and unstable. But the Rhino remained gentle. It grazed quietly, slept often, and showed no aggression, except when provoked. And despite her campaign of fear, most neighbors grew more curious than afraid. Some even admired Noah for standing his ground against her. They whispered that Karen had gone too far this time. The tension grew like a storm cloud over the neighborhood. Then came the night of the inspection. Karen convinced the HOA to conduct an emergency safety review. Under the pretext of ensuring community welfare, she led 2 board members and a city inspector to Noah's property. They arrived unannounced, flashlights in hand, walking with forced authority. Noah met them at the gate, calm as ever. He presented every document again, licenses, permits, safety reports. Everything was in order. The inspector confirmed that the fencing was secure and the animal was properly contained. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She wanted failure, not facts. She paced near the enclosure, muttering about liability, while her flashlight beam danced across the rhino's resting form. The animal blinked at the light, shifting uneasily. The inspector asked her to step back, but she ignored him. She moved closer to the fence, voice rising, ranting about danger and irresponsibility. The rhino lifted its head again, ears twitching at the noise. Karen waved her hand dismissively, the light flashing directly in its eyes. A deep, low snort echoed in the dark. The inspector, nervous, stepped between her and the fence. "It's reacting to the light," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. But Karen scoffed, brushing past him to take photos for her report. The camera flash went off, once, twice, 3 times. That was enough. The rhino shifted its weight, gave a short, warning stomp that shook the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't charging, just asserting space. But the sound and power behind it sent a ripple of panic through the group. The board members stumbled back, the inspector raised a hand, and Karen, always the dramatist, shrieked as if attacked. She ran, tripping over the curb, twisting her ankle. The others rushed to help her, but she waved them off, already spinning the story in her mind. She claimed the rhino had lunged, that it had broken the fence. She demanded that the inspector declare the animal a public hazard. But the inspector didn't back her version. His report the next morning stated clearly that the rhino remained behind its barrier, that it responded only to provocation, and that the enclosure was fully secure. Karen's fury was volcanic. She accused the inspector of bias, called the board members cowards, and vowed to take her fight above the HOA. She drafted letters to the city council, called local reporters, and began building a case in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, Noah quietly repaired the latch on the gate, added another layer of fencing, and kept living his life. The rhino remained calm, unaware of the storm swirling around it. But Karen's obsession had become something darker. It wasn't about rules anymore, it was about revenge. The incident had consumed her. Her days were spent drafting complaints. Her nights were filled with sleepless scrolling through social media, looking for any sign that people were still talking about her humiliation. She began to unravel. Neighbors started avoiding her. Meetings grew tense and sparsely attended. The HOA, once her kingdom, began to fracture under her leadership. Some whispered about removing her from the board. But Karen wasn't done fighting. She had one last plan, one that would make Noah regret ever bringing that animal into her neighborhood. And this time she wouldn't rely on paperwork. By the 3rd week after the incident, Maple Grove Estates had changed. The neighborhood, once perfectly still and predictable, now felt divided. Those who quietly sided with Noah, and those too afraid to speak against Karen. But under the surface, even the silent ones were watching. They'd seen the videos, the reports, the drama. They were tired of the constant conflict. The HOA meetings that once revolved around lawn heights and mailbox colors now felt like small-scale trials. Karen was losing control, and she knew it. Every morning, she stood at her kitchen window with a cup of coffee, glaring across the cul-de-sac at Noah's property. The rhino's enclosure sat like a fortress, fenced, secure, and spotless. It represented everything she hated, defiance wrapped in legitimacy. She couldn't find him anymore. Every citation she sent was overturned with documentation. Animal control refused to get involved again. Even the city council stopped responding to her emails. The humiliation burned hotter each day, and when pride burns long enough, it turns into obsession. Karen began to think of ways to take matters into her own hands. Legal routes had failed her. Public outrage had backfired. So she began crafting something far more personal, something that couldn't be traced. Her plan started small. Late at night, when the neighborhood was quiet, she crept along the sidewalk with her flashlight off. She'd stop at the edge of Noah's fence, listening. The soft snorts and heavy breathing from the Rhino filled the darkness. It unsettled her but fueled her anger. She convinced herself she was doing the right thing, that she was protecting the neighborhood, restoring order. The first night, she tossed scraps of food near the fence. Fruits, mostly, laced with mild sedatives she'd ordered online. They weren't strong enough to harm, just to make the animal sluggish. Her logic was simple. If she could get footage of the Rhino acting unwell or agitated, she could send it to the authorities and claim neglect. But the plan failed before it began. The Rhino didn't eat the food. It sniffed once and walked away. The next morning, Noah quietly disposed of the scraps, aware someone had been tampering. He didn't call anyone. He didn't confront her. But from that moment, cameras appeared, small, discreet ones along the fence line, motion-triggered and silent. Karen noticed them 2 days later and felt a mix of rage and panic. She realized she'd been caught, though she had no proof yet. Instead of backing down, she doubled her efforts. If she couldn't make the Rhino seem dangerous, she'd make it look like it was. She waited for the next storm. It came on a Thursday night. Windy, loud, the kind of weather that masked sounds and movement. Dressed in dark clothes, she snuck into Noah's yard from the alley behind the houses. The gate wasn't locked this time. It was latched but easy to lift from the outside. Her heart pounded as she crept toward the enclosure. The air smelled of wet grass and earth. Lightning flashed, illuminating the massive silhouette of the Rhino resting near the shelter. Its sheer size made her hesitate. She told herself it was safe behind the secondary barrier, that she'd only be there for a moment. Her plan was to loosen a section of the inner gate, just enough to make it look like Noah's fencing was insecure. Then, when the morning came, she'd discover the damage, call the HOA, and claim the Rhino had nearly escaped. It was risky, but she was desperate. She crouched near the latch, rain soaking her sleeves. Her hands trembled as she unscrewed one of the bolts. The wind howled, covering the sound of metal clinking against concrete. The Rhino stirred, shifting its weight. Karen froze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, in one sudden motion, the animal stood. Its massive head turned toward her, nostrils flaring. She couldn't see its eyes in the dark, but she felt its awareness. It knew she was there. Lightning flashed again and instinct took over. She stumbled backward, tripped over the wet grass, and crashed into the outer fence. The gate she'd lifted swung halfway open. The Rhino, startled by the sudden noise and movement, stepped forward with a deep grunt. Karen screamed. The sound carried through the storm, echoing across the cul-de-sac. Porch lights flicked on. Curtains shifted. The Rhino spooked, took a step toward the open space, snorting loudly. Noah was out the door within seconds, rain pouring off his jacket. He sprinted to the enclosure, grabbing the outer gate and slamming it shut, just as the Rhino reached it. The animal stopped, breathing heavily, then backed away, calming as Noah spoke softly to it. Karen sat in the mud, drenched, shaking. Neighbors peeked out, trying to piece together what they'd just heard. Noah looked at her, confusion and frustration mixing in his expression, but he didn't say a word. He simply secured the latch, checked the fence, and called animal control, not to report her, but to confirm the animal's safety. When the officers arrived, Karen tried to explain. She claimed she'd heard noises and came to check for safety. But the story fell apart when they noticed the tools scattered near the gate, the unscrewed bolts, and the motion cameras recording everything. Noah handed them the footage. Every second of her trespassing, every step, every movement, it was all there. Karen's face went pale. The officers didn't arrest her, but they warned her that she was lucky the owner didn't press charges. They filed an official report and left her standing in the rain, her reputation soaked and ruined. The next morning, the footage made its way through the neighborhood. People didn't laugh this time. They were shocked. The idea that their HOA president had broken into a neighbor's property, risking her life and everyone else's safety, was too much to ignore. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, without her. By the end of the day, Karen was officially removed as president. Her name was stripped from every document, her access revoked. But even as her power crumbled, something inside her refused to let go. She told herself it wasn't over, that Noah had set her up, that the Rhino was a symbol of her downfall, and symbols could be destroyed. Late that night, she sat alone at her dining table, surrounded by papers and plans. The rain had stopped. The neighborhood was quiet again. Through her window, she could see the faint silhouette of the Rhino's enclosure under the moonlight. Her humiliation had turned into hatred, and hatred, when left to rot, becomes dangerous. She whispered to herself that if the HOA wouldn't act, she would. The following days passed in uneasy silence. Maple Grove Estates felt different. Calmer, quieter, but heavy with unspoken tension. Karen's removal from the HOA spread through the neighborhood like a cautionary tale. Her former allies avoided her, afraid of association. Parents steered their children away when she walked by. Even the local news picked up the story briefly, spinning it as Suburban scandal, HOA president caught trespassing. She became an outcast in the very place she once ruled. But isolation didn't soften her. It hardened her. She told herself everyone had turned against her unfairly. She believed Noah had manipulated the situation, that he'd set her up with his cameras and patience. In her mind, he wasn't the victim. He was the villain who'd stolen her authority and reputation. Every time she looked across the street and saw that calm, massive animal grazing behind its fence, it felt like mockery. The Rhino had become a symbol of everything she'd lost: control, respect, order. So she began planning her final move. It wasn't loud or dramatic this time. It was quiet, calculated, dangerous. She waited, watching Noah's patterns. He always took his truck into town early in the morning for feed and supplies, usually gone for about an hour. The neighborhood would still be asleep. The streets would be empty. She gathered everything the night before: tools, a flashlight, and a small container of industrial solvent she'd stolen from a maintenance shed near the HOA office before she lost access. The fumes burned her throat just opening it. Her plan was to pour it near the Rhino's gate latch, weaken the metal, and make it look like it had corroded from poor maintenance. If the latch failed later, the animal could escape, or at least appear to. Either way, Noah would be blamed. By dawn, she was ready. The morning air was cold and still. Mist hung low across the lawns, and not a single car passed as she crossed the street. Her shoes barely made a sound on the wet pavement. She moved quickly, her breath visible in the dim light. The gate loomed ahead, silent and solid. She hesitated for a moment, listening. The Rhino was awake, pacing slowly inside, its heavy steps muffled by the damp earth. She could hear it breathing. The sound alone made her hands tremble, but she forced herself forward. She poured the solvent carefully along the metal, trying to keep it quiet. The smell was sharp and sour. Her eyes watered. She coughed once, softly, then froze as the Rhino stopped moving. It turned toward the gate, head tilted slightly, ears twitching. Karen's pulse quickened. She stepped back, heart pounding. Then her foot hit the loose corner of a garden tile. It clattered loudly against the fence. The Rhino's reaction was instant. It snorted, a deep, resonant sound that rolled through the morning air. It stepped closer, powerful and deliberate. Karen stumbled backward, dropping the solvent canister, which splashed across the dirt. She reached for the gate, trying to steady herself, but the latch she'd weakened gave way under her hand. The gate creaked open just enough for the Rhino to push through. For a moment, the world stood still. The Rhino stepped forward. Not charging, not running, just moving through the mist, enormous and unstoppable. Karen backed away, shaking her head, her breath coming fast. The animal's eyes caught the faint light, calm but unblinking. It didn't know her anger or her schemes. It only recognized fear, noise, and movement. Karen turned and ran. Her foot slipped on the wet grass, sending her sprawling across the driveway. The Rhino followed slowly, not chasing, just curious, drawn by the motion and sound. Its heavy breathing filled the silence. Neighbors began to stir, lights flicking on. Someone shouted from a porch. The sound startled the Rhino again. It snorted and stamped once, lowering its head, not to attack, but as a warning. The movement sent Karen scrambling backward on her hands and knees. She reached her car, fumbling for the door handle, slipping on the slick pavement. The engine started, tires spinning on the wet road as she reversed wildly. The Rhino took a step forward, brushing against the side mirror, leaving a deep scrape across the paint. The noise was deafening, Metal against hide, the squeal of tires, the crash of the car jerking against the curb. Then silence again. Noah's truck pulled into the street moments later. He stopped instantly, eyes wide at the sight before him, his Rhino outside the enclosure, Karen's car half on the lawn, neighbors gathering in stunned disbelief. He moved quickly, calmly, voice low and steady as he guided the Rhino back toward the yard. The animal followed, obedient, as if ashamed of the chaos it didn't mean to cause. Within minutes, it was back inside, gate secured with a chain this time. Karen sat in her car, hands trembling on the wheel, face pale. She didn't speak when the police arrived. They didn't need to ask many questions. The solvent container was there, her fingerprints on it, the cameras still rolling from the night before. The footage told the story again, frame by frame. She wasn't arrested immediately, but she was cited for trespassing and property damage. More importantly, the police notified the HOA board and the city council. Her actions had escalated from nuisance to public safety risk. Within 48 hours, Karen was ordered to vacate her home. Her insurance company refused coverage for the incident, citing negligence. Neighbors watched as the moving truck came days later, carrying away boxes of her carefully curated life. No one waved goodbye. Noah stayed quiet through it all. He never gloated, never spoke ill of her, never posted a word online. He rebuilt the gate, added new locks, and extended the fence even higher. The Rhino went back to its calm routines, grazing, sleeping, breathing peace back into the neighborhood. Weeks passed, and life in Maple Grove Estates slowly returned to normal. The lawns were trimmed, mailboxes painted, and HOA meetings resumed, this time without tyranny. The new president made it clear, no more harassment, no more witch hunts, no more power games. As for Karen, no one knew where she went. Some said she moved to another town. Others whispered that she'd left the state altogether. Her house sold quietly, her name erased from community records. But sometimes, in the stillness of early morning, neighbors swore they could hear something faint from beyond the fence, a low grunt, the sound of the Rhino stirring. And for those who remembered, it was a reminder that nature, no matter how controlled people try to make it, always has a way of defending itself. And that sometimes karma doesn't come with warning signs, it comes with horns.